Dad, please do not hate me for this. They are coming for Mom's sewing machine, and I cannot stop them. Addy Vance's voice cracked on the last word as she held a grease-stained final notice in one trembling hand. The paper folded so many times its edges had gone soft and gray. In her other palm, the small wooden bird her father had carved for her years ago was trapped so tightly that its wing left a red mark in her skin. It was 10:47 a.m., and the amount printed in bold black ink was no longer the $500 she had borrowed to help a friend, but $1,327.42, swollen with late fees, renewal charges, and penalties she barely understood. Her diner shoes were split near the left toe, and her fingers smelled faintly of bleach from the offices she cleaned after midnight. She had worked almost 70 hours that week. It still was not enough. The notice gave her until Friday at 5 p.m. before Easy Cash now could send someone to claim the antique Singer machine she had listed as collateral in a line of fine print she barely remembered signing. The only thing her mother had left behind, and the only thing Addy had planned to build a future with. Then the room went quiet. A chair leg scraped behind her. Silas Vance stepped into the light, his creaking Hell's Angels leather vest stretching across his massive shoulders, his thick gray beard shadowing a face that looked hard enough to scare grown men silent. His shadow fell over Addy, broad and dark, swallowing the table between them while she sat beneath it, small, exhausted, and shaking. Silas did not speak right away. That silence frightened her more than anger would have, because her father had always been a man whose quiet could fill a room heavier than a shout. Addy lowered her eyes to the cracked linoleum floor of the Maplewood Community Center, trying to focus on the thin gray lines beneath her shoes instead of the final notice trembling in her hands. The place around them was supposed to feel safe, with its old folding tables, faded bulletin boards, and the faint smell of coffee drifting from the volunteer counter. But that morning it felt like every wall had moved closer. She had rehearsed this confession during dishwashing shifts, during late-night office cleaning, during the walk home with her feet aching so badly she had to stop twice under the streetlights. Every version in her head ended badly. Some ended with Silas turning away in silence. Some ended with him doing exactly what she feared most, taking the problem into his own hands and turning a bad loan into something even worse. She swallowed hard, but the lump in her throat would not move. The wooden bird pressed deeper into her palm, the little carved sparrow that had once meant freedom now feeling like proof of how trapped she had become. Silas finally pulled out the chair across from her. The metal legs scraped softly against the floor. He sat down slowly, his large hands resting on the table, close enough to help, but not close enough to make her feel cornered. His face gave nothing away. His eyes did. They stayed on her, steady and dark, waiting for the rest of the truth. Silas lowered his eyes to the final notice first, then to the small wooden bird trapped in Addy's palm. He did not need her to repeat what she had already said. The shape of the danger was clear enough. A $500 loan, a balance swollen to $1,327.42, a Friday deadline, and her mother's sewing machine listed as collateral in fine print she had barely understood. That was not a simple mistake. That was a trap. He reached for the paper slowly, giving Addy time to pull it back if she wanted to, but she only loosened her grip and let him take it. The notice was thin and cheap, the kind of paper that looked harmless until the words on it started taking pieces out of a person's life. Silas read the company name once, then again. Easy Cash now. He noticed the bright yellow logo, the account number printed near the top, the block of small text at the bottom, and the line that named the antique Singer machine as recoverable property if the balance was not paid by Friday at 5 p.m. His jaw tightened, but he did not curse. He did not slam his hand on the table. Addy was watching him too closely for that. That sewing machine was not just furniture or equipment. It was the last working piece of her mother's hands, the thing his late wife had used to hem church dresses, men work shirts, and teach Addy how to guide fabric without forcing it. After the funeral, Addy had spent hours at that machine, oiling the gears, polishing the dark wood, and listening to the needle move as if the sound could keep grief from swallowing the house. Silas remembered standing in the hallway, hearing that steady hum, and knowing his daughter was trying to sew herself back together one quiet stitch at a time. Now some storefront lender had reduced all of that to a line of collateral. He folded the notice once, carefully, and set it between them. I understand what they are threatening, he said at last, his voice low. Now I need to understand how they got you there. Addy's lips parted, but no sound came out. Shame rose in her face before the words did. Silas saw it, and kept his hands still on the table, close enough to show he was there, far enough away not to corner her. Start with why you signed it, he said. Start with the person you were trying to help. Addy looked down at the wooden bird again. The hardest part was not the notice anymore. The hardest part was saying Sarah's name. Silas continued to observe Addy, his attentive gaze a silent anchor in the hushed corner of the community center. The small wooden bird remained a prisoner in her tight grip, its delicate wings hidden by her fingers. He could feel the tremor in her hands, even from across the table. The notice had explained the threat, but it had not explained the wound beneath it. A broken promise had pushed Addy toward that storefront. Someone had made her believe signing those papers was an act of kindness instead of the beginning of a trap. He wanted to speak, to offer reassurance, but he knew that sometimes the most helpful thing was simply to listen, to provide an unwavering presence. He let the silence hang, a space for her to gather her thoughts, to find the courage to share more, to untangle the knotted threads of her story. Just then, a warm, familiar voice broke the tension. Silas, Addy, how are you two doing today? Ms. Eleanor Hayes, the community center director, approached their table, a steaming carafe in one hand and a stack of paper cups in the other. Her smile was genuine, her eyes kind, missing nothing but judging nothing. She was a woman who had seen much in her years running the Maplewood Community Center, and she possessed a deep, quiet wisdom that put people at ease, a soothing balm in moments of distress. I just brewed a fresh pot. Can I get you both some coffee? She asked, her gaze lingering on Addy for a moment, sensing the unspoken weight in the air, the heavy atmosphere surrounding them. Addy looked up, startled by the interruption, but a flicker of relief crossed her face. Ms. Hayes's presence was like a small, unexpected shield, momentarily easing the direct pressure of her father's intense gaze. Oh yes, Ms. Hayes. Thank you. Addy managed, her voice still thin, but a little stronger than before, finding a fragile footing. Silas nodded his acceptance, his eyes acknowledging Eleanor's subtle support, her understanding of the delicate situation. He knew Eleanor understood the intricate dance of human emotion, the need for a neutral presence when heavy truths were being shared. As Eleanor poured the coffee, the gentle clinking of cups against the table provided a small, welcome distraction. Addy took a deep breath, her gaze still mostly averted, but now she looked at the steam rising from her cup instead of the floor, finding a new point of focus. I got into this loan to help a friend, she mumbled, the words tumbling out in a rush, as if she feared they would disappear if she did not say them quickly. She was in a bind, and I thought I could help her out. Sarah, her name was. She said she just needed a little to cover rent for a week or two, until her next paycheck. She promised to pay me back. Addy's voice trailed off, a fresh wave of shame washing over her. But then she disappeared, and I was left with it. The shame in her voice was palpable, a raw wound exposed, the bitter taste of misplaced trust evident in her tone. Silas's face remained impassive to an outsider, but his eyes, fixed on his daughter, softened almost imperceptibly. He saw the genuine distress, the youthful mistake born of a desire to help, not of malice or recklessness. He understood the sting of misplaced trust, the bitter taste of being left to carry someone else's burden, a feeling he knew from his own past. His large hand, resting on the table, did not move, but the subtle shift in his gaze conveyed a wordless message. Asterisk, I hear you. Keep going. Asterisk, the coffee was warm in Addy's hands, a small comfort against the cold dread in her stomach. The first part of the truth was out, the reason behind the predatory loan, the vanished friend, the crushing weight of a promise broken. She had to tell him everything now, the full, ugly details of the loan itself, the terms that had trapped her, the numbers that had grown beyond her control. She knew she had to face it, and for the first time, with Ms. Hayes's subtle presence and her father's attentive, listening gaze, she felt a fragile thread of courage beginning to form, a tiny spark in the darkness. Addy still clutched the wooden bird, its smooth surface now damp with the sweat from her palm, a physical manifestation of her ongoing anxiety. Ms. Hayes had retreated slightly, giving them space but remaining within earshot, a subtle guardian, her presence a comforting anchor. The coffee in Addy's cup had cooled, but she did not notice. Her confession about the vanished friend had opened the floodgates, and now the details of the predatory loan poured out, haltingly at first, then with a desperate rush, as if she could not get them out fast enough. It was for $500, she explained, her voice low, almost a whisper, barely audible above the faint sounds of the community center. Just to help Sarah with her rent. She promised to pay me back in 2 weeks, swore on it. Addy paused, taking a ragged breath, her chest heaving slightly. The company, it was called Easy Cash Now. Their office was just a small storefront downtown, bright yellow sign. They said it was simple, just a small fee. But then the interest started, and the late fees, and then more fees for not paying the late fees. I had already paid $684.19, Dad, and somehow the balance still said $1,327.42. Her voice broke on the number. It just kept growing, spiraling out of control. She gestured vaguely with her free hand, as if trying to grasp the invisible, mounting numbers that had consumed her life. I tried, Dad. I really did. I picked up extra shifts at the diner, scrubbing grease from the grill until my hands ached. I cleaned offices in the evenings, pushing heavy vacuums and emptying trash cans, sometimes working until midnight. I was working almost 70 hours a week, just to keep up. But every time I made a payment, it felt like the amount owed barely changed. It was like running on a treadmill, going nowhere, just exhausting myself. Her eyes finally flickered up to Silas, a raw plea for understanding in their depths, a desperate hope for absolution. I was so ashamed. I thought I could fix it myself. I did not want to tell you, did not want to worry you, did not want you to be disappointed in me. She looked down again, her gaze fixed on the small sparrow, as if seeking solace in its carved stillness, its silent presence. I know how you are, Dad. How the club is. I thought you would be angry. I thought you would want it to handle it in your own way. The unspoken meaning hung heavy in the air. The Hell's Angels way, which Addy feared might involve confrontation, threats, or methods that would only make things worse, perhaps even drawing unwanted attention to their family. She imagined him showing up at the loan company, his large frame intimidating, his reputation preceding him, perhaps causing more trouble than it solved. That fear, combined with her deep shame over her own poor judgment and trusting nature, had kept her silent for months, allowing the problem to fester and grow into an insurmountable mountain. Silas remained still, his large frame a study in focused intensity. He did not interrupt, did not scold. He simply listened, his eyes absorbing every detail, every nuance of her distress, every word of her confession. He saw the genuine effort she had made, the exhaustion in her eyes, the immense burden she had carried alone. He saw not a foolish girl, but a young woman who had made a mistake out of kindness and then tried desperately to fix it on her own, out of pride and a misguided sense of protection for him. The truth, raw and painful, was finally laid bare. The Friday deadline, the predatory terms, the lost hope for her mother's sewing machine. It all clicked into place. He reached a hand across the table, not to touch her, but to rest it near her tightly clasped fingers, a silent offer of support, a promise of his presence. He knew what he had to do. Silas Vance remained still, his large hand resting near Addy's on the table, a silent, steady anchor in the storm of her confession. He heard the raw shame in her voice, the desperate efforts she had made to fix her mistake alone, and the deep fear she held of his reaction. He saw the exhaustion etched around her eyes, the burden she had carried, a weight that had been too heavy for too long, pressing down on her spirit. He took a slow, deep breath, the air in the community center suddenly feeling heavier, charged with unspoken truths, with the weight of her vulnerability. He remembered a time, many years ago, when he himself had made a quick, bad decision, a choice born of pride and a misguided belief that he could handle everything on his own. He had learned lessons the hard way, and the quiet shame that had followed him, the bitter taste of regret, was a feeling he knew well. He understood the trap she had fallen into, not just the financial one, but the emotional one, the one that made you believe you were alone in your struggle, isolated by your own errors. He met her gaze, his eyes softening, losing their usual intensity, replacing it with a profound understanding. "Addy," he said, his voice low and calm, devoid of anger, "I am not angry with you. I am concerned. Deeply concerned that you carried this alone for so long, that you felt you had to face this by yourself." He did not raise his voice, did not make a sudden movement. He simply held her gaze, letting his words sink in, allowing her to see the truth in his eyes, the genuine care that superseded any disappointment. He saw the flicker of surprise in her own, the slow, almost imperceptible loosening of her grip on the small wooden bird, a tiny sign of her guard lowering. "You are my daughter," he continued, his voice resolute. "You do not carry a burden like this alone. Not when I am here. You are my own, and we protect our own." He paused, letting that sink in, letting the full weight of his promise settle between them. He knew she feared his Hell's Angels way, the reputation that preceded him, the assumptions people made about how he might handle a problem. But he also knew that true strength was not always found in confrontation or brute force. Sometimes, it was found in quiet, methodical action, in careful planning, in seeking knowledge. "Now," he said, his tone shifting to a more practical, focused note, "I need you to give me everything. Every piece of paper you have from this Easy Cash Now company. The original agreement, the notices, the payment statements, everything. Do not hold anything back. We need all the facts, every single detail, no matter how small." He leaned forward slightly, his gaze firm but reassuring. "I will look into it," he promised, his voice carrying the weight of his word, the certainty of his commitment. "But not with threats, Addy. We will do this with facts, with information, with the law. I know a few people who understand how these paper trails work, people who can help us untangle this mess. We will find a way, a proper way." He saw a glimmer of something new in her eyes, a fragile spark of hope replacing the deep-seated fear, a small light in the darkness. The problem was still immense, the deadline still looming, but for the first time in months, Addy was not facing it alone. Silas knew the path ahead would be complicated, full of legal jargon and bureaucratic hurdles, but he also knew that the first step, the step of speaking the truth and asking for help, was often the hardest. Now, the real work, the methodical dismantling of the problem, could begin. The next morning, the gentle hum of the Maplewood Community Center was far from Silas Vance's mind. He was at his garage, a place usually filled with the roar of engines and the clang of tools, but today, it was unusually still. His motorcycle, a gleaming black machine, stood covered in a corner, its chrome dulled by a canvas tarp. This was not a day for riding, not a day for the open road. This was a day for a different kind of work, a meticulous, patient kind of work that required a clear head and focused attention. Addy's stack of papers, all marked with the aggressive, bright yellow logo of Easy Cash Now, lay spread across his workbench, displacing wrenches and spare parts, a stark contrast to the usual tools of his trade. He had spent the previous evening reading through every line, his brow furrowed, a silent anger simmering beneath his calm exterior as he absorbed the predatory terms. The hidden fees, the impossible interest rates, the convoluted clauses, it was all there, a clear trap designed to ensnare and exploit the desperate. He picked up his phone, a heavy, older model, its casing worn smooth from years of use, and dialed a number he had not called in years. "Mac," he said when the call connected, his voice low and steady. "Silas Vance here. I need a favor, a discreet one, about some paperwork." Mac, a retired paralegal and a former club member, understood the unspoken language, the nuances of Silas's request. Silas explained the situation, focusing on the legal aspects, the dates, the specific clauses in the loan agreement, presenting the facts without embellishment. He did not ask for threats or muscle. He asked for knowledge, for the kind of information that could only be found in statutes and case law, in the quiet corners of legal libraries. Mac listened patiently, asking sharp, precise questions, his mind still keen despite his years away from active practice. He gave Silas a few pointers, suggested specific documents to look for, and provided contact numbers for local legal aid services and consumer protection agencies. "These outfits," Mac had said, his voice raspy, "they count on people being too scared or too ashamed to fight back. You show up with facts, Silas, and they often fold, They do not want the scrutiny. Armed with this initial guidance, Silas put on a clean, dark jacket, leaving his club vest at home, opting for a more neutral appearance. He drove his pickup truck, not his bike, to the county courthouse first, where public terminals lined one quiet wall beneath a row of flickering fluorescent lights. Inside, the air was dry and smelled of old paper, toner, and dust. He searched court filings for the name Easy Cash Now, copied down 2 old complaint numbers, and wrote everything in a small spiral notebook. From there, he called the state lender licensing office and waited 18 minutes on hold before a clerk confirmed that the company's license had already drawn consumer complaints. He did not raise his voice. He did not use his name like a threat. He asked for the correct forms, the correct phone numbers, and the correct process. By noon, he had also called the Attorney General's Consumer Protection Line and written down the address of a local legal aid office that handled predatory lending cases. He was not a lawyer, but he understood systems, understood how to find information, how to follow a trail, how to build a case brick by brick. He gathered brochures, printed out relevant sections of state law, and meticulously copied down the names and numbers of organizations dedicated to fighting predatory lending. His hands, usually stained with grease and oil, were now smudged with printer ink, a testament to his new task. The work was slow, tedious, and required a different kind of strength than he was used to, but with each piece of information he found, a small, determined hope began to build. He was not just looking for a way out. He was building a path forward, a lawful, dignified path for his daughter. By late afternoon, the folder he carried was thick with documents, a physical result of his focused, methodical effort. He had a plan, a clear direction, and the knowledge that he was not alone in this fight, that there were systems and people who could help. He knew the next step was to present this to Addy, to show her that the burden she had carried alone could now be shared, and perhaps finally lifted. Silas Vance returned to the Maplewood Community Center on Thursday afternoon, the day before the Friday deadline loomed like a storm cloud, heavy with implied threat. The substantial folder he carried felt weighty in his hand, a palpable product of his hours spent researching and making calls. He had traded the grease and oil of his garage for the dry scent of old paper and the hushed tones of county offices, but the determination in his eyes remained the same, a focused resolve. He found Addy and Ms. Hayes at their usual table in a quieter corner, the same spot where Addy had finally unburdened her secret, a place that now held a new, fragile significance. Addy still looked pale, her shoulders slightly hunched, the small wooden bird half hidden inside the pocket of her cardigan, while her hands were clasped tightly in her lap, a nervous habit. The weight of the impending deadline was visible in the anxious flicker of her gaze as Silas approached, her eyes darting to the folder in his hand. Ms. Hayes offered a gentle, encouraging smile, her presence a silent testament to the community's unwavering support, a comforting anchor. Silas pulled out a chair, the scrape of its legs against the linoleum floor the loudest sound in their immediate vicinity, an abrupt interruption to the quiet tension. He placed the thick folder on the table between them, its bulk a stark contrast to the flimsy, threatening notices Addy had received from Easy Cash Now. Before Silas could open the folder, Addy's phone buzzed against the table. The screen lit up with a number she had saved only as Do Not Answer. Her face drained of color. A voicemail appeared seconds later. Addy's thumb hovered over the screen until Silas gave one small nod. Then she tapped play, and the tiny speaker filled the space between them with a clipped male voice. Ms. Vance, this is Easy Cash Now calling at 3:42 p.m. regarding your delinquent collateral account. If the full balance is not received by Friday at 5 p.m., recovery will proceed as scheduled. The message ended with a beep. Addy stared at the phone like it had bitten her. Silas did not touch it. He only looked at the folder, then back at his daughter. Good, he said quietly. Now we have their words too. Only after the voicemail ended did he turn the folder toward her. He looked at Addy, his expression calm and steady, his gaze direct. I have been busy, he stated, his voice low but clear, cutting through the tension with a firm edge. I spoke with Mac, the paralegal I told you about. Then I checked the county courthouse records, called the state lender licensing office, and reached the Attorney General's Consumer Protection Line. Addy watched him, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and a fragile, nascent hope. She did not speak, simply waited, her breath held, her body taut with expectation. Silas opened the folder, revealing a carefully organized stack of papers. There was a brochure for the local legal aid society, highlighted sections of state consumer protection laws, and a printout with the contact information for a lawyer specializing in predatory lending. He pushed the folder gently towards her, a physical offering of hope. This company, Easy Cash Now, may have violated several regulations, he explained, his finger tracing a highlighted paragraph on one of the printouts, making the complex legal language accessible. Mac looked over the numbers, and the interest, the fee stacking, and the way they handled the collateral do not look right. A lawyer still needs to confirm it, but this is not something you should just accept because they printed it on yellow paper. He paused, letting the information sink in, allowing her to process the profound implications. Max said these companies rely on people not knowing their rights, on being too scared or too ashamed to fight back. They profit from fear and silence. He looked at Addy, his gaze unwavering, conveying his conviction. You may have a strong case, Addy. Strong enough to fight. Addy's eyes scanned the documents, her brow furrowed in concentration. The words on the page, once intimidating and confusing, now seemed to hold a different meaning, a promise of defense, a path to justice. She reached out a hesitant finger, touching the legal aid brochure, as if to confirm its reality. So it is not just me, she whispered, the question laced with a profound relief, a shedding of personal blame. I am not just stupid for signing it. Silas shook his head slowly, firmly. No, Addy, you were taken advantage of. That is what these companies do. But there are ways to fight it, lawful ways, responsible ways. He then explained the next steps, the clear path forward. Legal aid may be able to request an emergency pause on the pickup. If they send the right dispute letter tomorrow morning, Easy Cash Now may have to stop and review the collateral claim before anyone touches the sewing machine. It buys us time. And then, they can help you challenge the unfair terms of the loan through the proper channels. The words were not a magical solution, but they were a specific plan, a clear direction out of the maze she had been lost in. The truth, once a heavy burden, was now a weapon, a tool for justice, for reclaiming her dignity. For the first time, the Friday deadline did not feel like an execution, but a starting line, a chance to begin anew. Silas watched her, knowing that the hardest part, the emotional acceptance of help, was still unfolding. The community center, often a place for small victories, was now witnessing a much larger one, a quiet turning point in Addy's life, a moment of profound shift. Silas watched Addy, allowing his words to settle, allowing the weight of the information to sink in. He saw the flicker of understanding in her eyes, the slow dawning of hope replacing the fear that had shadowed her for months, a gradual illumination. The folder, filled with legal aid contacts and consumer protection laws, lay open between them, a tangible shield against the predatory loan company, a physical representation of their new defense. He knew that knowledge was power, and he had worked hard to arm his daughter with it, to give her the tools she needed. Tomorrow morning, we start with legal aid, Silas said. Not because this is already solved, but because we finally know which door to knock on. He tapped the folder once, softly. This is not a miracle, Addy. It is a first step, but it is a real one. He saw a subtle tremor run through Addy's shoulders, a physical release of tension, a visible sign of a burden beginning to lift. And then, he continued, they can help you fight the unfair terms of the loan. They will look at every single page, every fee, every clause. They will know whether this should be handled through a complaint, a negotiation, or court if it comes to that. He offered to drive her to the legal aid office first thing Friday morning, removing another barrier, another excuse for her to face it alone. We will go together, he said, his gaze firm, his commitment clear. You will not be alone in this, not anymore. Addy looked at the folder, her eyes tracing the words on the legal aid brochure. Then she looked at her father. His face, usually so stoic, held an expression of resolute calm, a deep, unfailing support that she had not dared to hope for, a quiet strength she had underestimated. He had not yelled. He had not judged. He had simply acted, methodically, responsibly, using his network and his intelligence to find a lawful path forward, a path of dignity. The Hells Angels way she had feared was not violence or intimidation, but a quiet, fierce protection, a commitment to his own, a demonstration of true paternal strength. Her fingers, which had been clasped tightly in her lap, slowly uncurled. She reached into the pocket of her cardigan and pulled out the small, hand-carved wooden bird that had been her silent confidant, her emotional anchor through weeks of fear and shame. It had been a symbol of her burden, clutched so tightly, its delicate wings hidden by her desperate grip, a prisoner of her anxiety. Now, with a deep, shuddering breath, a profound exhalation, she finally released it. She placed the wooden bird gently on the table, its smooth, cool surface a stark contrast to the rough texture of the legal documents, yet perfectly at peace among them. It was a wordless act, a visible sign of her letting go, of shedding the immense weight she had carried alone for so long. A single tear rolled down her cheek, but this time, it was not a tear of shame or fear. It was a tear of relief, of gratitude, of a fragile, newfound hope that shimmered in her eyes. Ms. Hayes, who had been observing from a respectful distance, offered a soft, knowing smile. She understood the significance of that small bird, the unspoken language of a burden lifted, a spirit set free. The community center, a place designed for connection and support, had once again proven its purpose, witnessing a profound personal victory. The immediate threat was not gone, but the path forward was clear, illuminated by truth and support. Addy had found her voice, and her father had shown her a different kind of strength, a strength rooted in calm action and unwavering support. The Friday deadline, once a terrifying end, now felt like a beginning, a chance to reclaim her dignity and her future. The following morning, Friday, Silas Vance drove Addy to the legal aid office before the doors had even been unlocked. The drive was mostly silent, but it was a comfortable silence, different from the heavy, anxious quiet that had filled their car just days before. Addy sat straighter in the passenger seat, no longer hunched, her hands resting calmly in her lap. The small wooden bird was not clutched in her grip. It rested safely on her dresser at home, a memory of a burden, not the burden itself, a symbol of a past struggle. Silas parked his truck across from the brick building and walked beside her to the entrance, close enough for support, but careful not to take the moment away from her. Inside, he sat in the waiting room beneath a bulletin board crowded with eviction notices, food pantry flyers, and free tax clinic schedules. Addy went in to meet the lawyer by herself. That was the line Silas chose carefully. He would not leave her alone, but he would not speak over her either. For the first time, Addy had to tell the story without hiding behind shame. When Addy emerged 90 minutes later, her face was still serious, reflecting the gravity of the process, but a faint, determined light shone in her eyes. She walked with a new sense of purpose, her shoulders back, her stride more confident. The lawyer had not solved everything in one meeting, but she had done enough to stop the immediate damage. An emergency dispute letter had been sent to Easy Cash Now. A complaint was being prepared for the State Consumer Protection Office, and the company had been forced to pause the pickup while the collateral claim was reviewed. It was not a complete victory, not yet. It was breathing room. For Addy, that was enough to stand upright again. The antique sewing machine, her mother's legacy and her own dream, was safe for now, its future uncertain but no longer immediately threatened. The weeks that followed were not simple. There were phone calls, follow-up meetings at the legal aid office, and the slow, methodical work of gathering more documentation and preparing her case. But Addy was no longer alone in the fight. With Silas's unfailing support, she navigated the legal process, understanding that justice was a journey, not an instantaneous destination. She started spending more time at the Maplewood Community Center, not just as a visitor, but as a volunteer. Ms. Hayes, always observant and supportive, had noticed Addy's newfound energy and offered her a chance to help organize a small craft fair. Addy, surprisingly, found joy in the work. She helped set up tables, called local artisans, designed some of the promotional flyers, and even assisted with the bake sale, her laughter mingling with the other volunteers. The rhythmic hum of the center, the laughter of children in the play area, and the friendly chatter of the seniors in the common room filled the void that shame and fear had once occupied, replacing it with connection and purpose. She learned to speak up, to ask questions, to voice her opinions, finding a quiet confidence she did not know she possessed, a strength that had been hidden beneath her fear. The community center became more than just a place. It became a haven, a place where she could rebuild, not just her life, but her sense of self, surrounded by a supportive community. Silas would often stop by, sometimes just to have a cup of coffee with Ms. Hayes, sometimes to watch Addy from a distance as she worked, a small, proud smile playing on his lips, a silent acknowledgement of her growth. He saw her blooming, slowly, steadily, like a flower after a long winter, regaining her vibrancy. Addy learned that hope was not a magical fix, an instantaneous solution to all her problems. Instead, it was a path forward, built on honesty, on steadfast support, and on the strength found in community. She understood that even the heaviest burdens could be lifted, not by force, but by truth, by patience, and by the unwavering presence of those who cared. On the morning of the craft fair, the antique singer machine sat near the front windows of the Maplewood Community Center, polished until the dark wood caught the light. Addy guided a piece of blue cotton beneath the needle, stitching the outline of a small bird onto the corner of a child's apron. Silas stood near the doorway with 2 cups of coffee in his hands, his leather vest creaking softly when he shifted his weight. He did not say he was proud. He did not have to. Addy looked up, saw him watching, and smiled before turning back to the machine. This time, the bird was not trapped in her hand. It was moving forward, one careful stitch at a time. This story is a fictional narrative created for entertainment, reflection, and educational purposes. Any resemblance to real people, places, or events is purely coincidental.